33 years. 3 decades of secrets, silence, and power-shielding power. A man gave the authorities everything: names, dates, proof. And for 33 years, the system looked the other way. Too big, too untouchable, too dangerous to expose. But now, the files are open. The evidence is in the light. And the people Hollywood tried to erase? They're back, standing at the center of a storm they never created, but one they're determined to finish. This is the story the world was never meant to see. The Stranger in Weird Town. I take you back to 1998. A young Mel Gibson walks into Hollywood, 25 years old, wide-eyed, talented, and completely unprepared for what he's about to discover. He's described it since in terms that sound almost cinematic, and that's the irony. He said it was like wandering into one of those old horror movie towns, the kind where a stranger pushes through the saloon doors and the entire bar goes silent. Everyone stares, nobody talks, and eventually someone leans over and whispers, "Don't go up to the house on the hill." Mel felt that, not in a movie, in real life. He noticed the way people behaved at certain parties, the conversations that stopped when he entered a room, the invitations he never received to gatherings that everyone else seemed to know about. And for years, he did what most of us would do. He told himself he was imagining it. He called himself paranoid. He pushed the thoughts down and kept working, because that's what you do when your career is taking off and you don't want to believe the ground underneath you is rotten. But the feeling never left. In his own words, he's talked about having weird, paranoid suspicions that he couldn't explain. Things that didn't add up. Behavior that made no sense unless something deeply wrong was happening beneath the surface. And the thing about Mel is he didn't just sit with those suspicions quietly. He started asking questions. He started pushing back. And when he made The Passion of the Christ, a film so personal and so controversial that every single major studio in Hollywood refused to finance it, he had to put up his own money, every cent. And the industry's response was swift and brutal. They labeled him, they blacklisted him. They dismantled his reputation piece by piece until the public narrative was simple. Mel Gibson is the problem. Don't listen to Mel Gibson. Mel Gibson is finished. But here's the thing about trying to silence someone who's telling the truth. Every time they called him crazy, a few more people started paying attention. Every time they tried to cancel him, a few more people started digging into what he was actually saying. The industry wanted him gone, but all they really did was make him more credible to the people who were already sensing that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong with the machine. The truth wins. Fast forward. The Sound of Freedom gets made. It's produced with Mel Gibson's involvement, stars Jim Caviezel, and tells the story of a man fighting against child trafficking networks. On the surface, it's a film. But anyone paying attention could see it was something more. The movie depicted fake modeling scouts luring young victims with promises of opportunity. And it showed children being transported to remote private locations where powerful men waited. It showed a system, not a single villain, but an entire infrastructure designed to exploit the most vulnerable people on the planet while the world looked the other way. And Hollywood's reaction told you everything you needed to know. The film wasn't just ignored, it was actively resisted. Theaters reported mysterious technical difficulties on opening weekend. Showtimes vanished from booking systems without explanation. Entire screenings were canceled. Angel Studios, the distributor, found themselves in a street fight just to keep the movie on screens. And the media, the mainstream outlets that are supposed to hold power accountable, they didn't investigate why a movie about child trafficking was being suppressed. Instead, They attacked the movie itself. They called it conspiracy adjacent. They tied it to fringe movements. They used every tool in the playbook to make sure that walking into a theater to watch this film felt like a political act rather than a human one. But here's what they couldn't control. People showed up anyway. Not because of marketing, not because of celebrity endorsements, because the subject matter mattered to them. The film earned $85 million in less than 2 weeks. By the time its theatrical run ended, it had crossed $250 million worldwide, all on a $14.5 million budget. The audience sent a message that was impossible to misinterpret. We want the truth, and you cannot stop us from finding it. Power protects predators. Now I need you to hear another voice, because this story isn't just about movies and money. It's about real people who lived through real horrors and spent years begging us to listen. Corey Feldman has been saying for decades that he and Corey Haim were abused by powerful figures in Hollywood when they were children. He didn't whisper it. He said it on camera. He said it in interviews. He told the Santa Barbara Police Department in 1993, sat down, gave them names, gave them details, and then watched as absolutely nothing happened. And when he kept talking, when he refused to stop, the industry did what it always does. They called him desperate. They called him a has-been chasing relevance. They made him the punchline so nobody would take him seriously. But listen to what he actually said. He told us, plainly, that the people who did this are still working. They're still out there. They're some of the richest, most powerful people in the business. And they do not want him saying what he's saying. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's a man who lived through something horrific, who tried to get justice through the proper channels, who was ignored by the very systems that were supposed to protect him, and who kept speaking anyway because the alternative was letting it continue in silence. He was asked point-blank whether the people he was describing were guilty of the worst possible crimes against children. His answer was, one word, yes. And then he added, they're still in this business. That was years ago. And we moved on. We scrolled past it. We changed the channel. But the Epstein files are making it very, very hard to keep scrolling. But 3 million pages of truth. Let's talk about what's actually in these documents, because this is where suspicion becomes undeniable evidence. Over 3 million files have been unsealed. Emails, photographs, flight logs, financial records, and sworn testimonies. Each one paints a picture so dark it's difficult to process. A web of deception, manipulation, and exploitation that stretches far beyond what most people imagined. These aren't isolated incidents. They're patterns. They describe a system built on fake talent agencies, sham modeling opportunities, and promises of careers that were nothing more than traps. Young people, many of them minors, were lured into situations from which escape was nearly impossible. The details echo the storyline of Sound of Freedom almost frame by frame: the fake scouts, the remote locations, the wealthy men operating with near-total impunity. The movie wasn't fiction. It was a mirror of documented reality. Consider real-world parallels. Jeffrey Epstein's network is a case study in this same system. His private flights, meticulously logged, show repeated trips carrying high-profile individuals to his residences in Manhattan, Palm Beach, and Little St. James. Investigations revealed how recruiters, enablers, and facilitators operated under the guise of modeling or tutoring opportunities. Epstein's arrest in 2019 and the subsequent court filings exposed decades of manipulation, including testimonies from survivors detailing coercion, blackmail, and exploitation. These records, combined with flight logs and financial statements, confirmed what insiders had long suspected: a system protected at the highest levels, shielded by power, money, and silence. The newly released files now show a similar pattern across Hollywood. Emails and financial transactions reveal the mechanics of influence. Payments disguised as legitimate business, invitations to private parties framed as networking, and messages coordinating access to vulnerable individuals. One quote from a producer in the documents is chilling. His philosophy about women in the industry was simple: either naked or dead. This isn't satire, it isn't a joke. It's a statement of how some decision-makers operated, even while publicly preaching equality, human rights, and empowerment every awards season. What makes these revelations even more disturbing is the disconnect between public image and private reality. While celebrities posted the right messages online and championed social causes, the files suggest many knew or had enough reason to know about the systemic abuse surrounding them and did nothing. Silence wasn't just complicity, it was profitable. Invitations, endorsements, and career advancement often depended on looking the other way. And now, the walls are closing in. As journalists, investigators, and citizens dig through these 3 million documents, patterns emerge. Networks of enablers, repeated behaviors, and the infrastructure of exploitation become clear. The system is no longer invisible. The people who once believed they were untouchable are being confronted with evidence they cannot deny. This isn't a story about speculation. It's about the convergence of reality and documentation. Every scene in Sound of Freedom that shocked audiences was drawn directly from documented events. Events that, until now, many chose to ignore. And as the files continue to surface, the question isn't whether these abuses occurred. The question is, how far will accountability reach? And who will finally face the consequences of a system that allowed the powerful to operate without fear for decades? Silence is complicity. This is the part that should disturb you the most. Not the predators themselves, but the people who knew and did nothing. The newly unsealed files reveal names. Not just the names of abusers, but the names of enablers. People who attended private gatherings where abuse happened, who witnessed horrors and turned away, who benefited from a system that rewarded silence. Some of these people are familiar. Some of them have been celebrated on red carpets, giving speeches about justice, about protecting the vulnerable, and about standing on the right side of history. They posted the right things online. They signed the right letters. They wore the right pins. And behind closed doors, they were part of the machine. Consider the story of Jeffrey Epstein, a man whose crimes spanned decades. Many knew. Many participated. Investigations later showed that prominent financiers, politicians, and celebrities moved through his world, attending events where abuse occurred, yet took no action. When Epstein was arrested in 2019, the public was shocked, but the documents that followed revealed a much darker network of knowledge and inaction. Epstein's list of associates, uncovered through court filings, included dozens of people who later claimed ignorance, but whose interactions with him spanned years. Silence had allowed abuse to flourish. Sound of Freedom. For the film about Tim Ballard and the fight against child trafficking illustrated this dynamic in another way. The story focuses not just on the traffickers, but on the power structures that protect them, the private gatherings, the exclusive events, the people with influence who quietly ensured the system kept running. It's a story mirrored in reality. In the aftermath of Epstein, it became clear how often institutions, Hollywood, corporate boards, even governments, prioritized reputation and profit over accountability. Witnesses stayed quiet. Lawyers obstructed investigations. Victims were ignored. Now, with over 3 million files unsealed, that silence is being exposed. Each document is a thread in a vast web, connecting names to events, parties, and gatherings once thought untouchable. Some were donors to charity events, and some served on panels advocating child protection, and some were simply spectators at exclusive parties. And the pattern is chilling: public virtue, private complicity. For the viewers, the question is no longer whether these events happened. We have court records, testimony, and corroborated investigations. The question is, what happens next? When the enablers are revealed, when the walls of secrecy begin to collapse, will justice reach beyond the predators themselves? Or will decades of carefully cultivated influence protect those who profited from silence? Sound of Freedom opened a door. The documents are widening it. And for the first time in decades, the story is no longer just about victims or perpetrators. It's about the network that allowed abuse to thrive and the society that tolerated silence. And because the truth is simple, accountability doesn't start with the guilty. It starts with the people who watched, nodded, and did nothing. And the world is finally asking them the question they've avoided for far too long. Why didn't you speak? Files of deception. For decades, the warnings were ignored. For decades, the files were sealed. For decades, the powerful and the protected moved through Hollywood with impunity, smiling at cameras, accepting awards, and telling us how the world should work. Over 33 years, men like Corey Feldman and whistleblowers who dared to speak were shouted down, dismissed as paranoid, and erased from the narrative. But now, the dam is breaking. Over 3 million files have been unsealed. Evidence once hidden is surfacing, and the truth they spent a generation burying is finally coming into view. But at the center of this storm are two men who Hollywood tried to erase: Mel Gibson and Mark Wahlberg. Neither is backing down. Their new film, Flight Risk, is more than a thriller about a pilot transporting a dangerous criminal. Insiders say the deeper story, the one driving the narrative, is the one Hollywood has fought hardest to suppress. What happens when someone in the industry dares to tell the truth? The threats, the blackmail, the calculated silencing. Wahlberg has been vocal about his faith and values, about refusing to play by the industry's unwritten rules. And when he and Gibson were photographed meeting Donald Trump at a UFC event, the backlash was immediate. Headlines didn't focus on the story they were telling. They focused on proximity to it. The outrage wasn't political. It was about who knows what and who survives knowing it. The irony is brutal. Hollywood spent decades trying to destroy Gibson's credibility. Every project is blocked. Every funding route is cut. Every reputation was undermined. And all of it backfired. The harder they tried to silence him, the louder his absence became. People began to ask, what did he know that made him so dangerous? And now, with millions of documents flooding the public domain, Gibson is no longer the villain. He is a man who saw the fire first and tried to pull the alarm while everyone else told him to sit down and be quiet. Meanwhile, the files themselves are exposing decades of systemic protection for abusers. Names surfacing daily, connections emerging between Hollywood elites, politicians, and patterns whistleblowers have described for generations. When the system built to shield the powerful is crumbling under the weight of its own evidence. And for the first time, the people who have fought this fight for years, Feldman, Gibson, and others, aren't alone. Public opinion is shifting. Audiences are paying attention. The threads that connect past abuses to present revelations are being pulled in ways the industry never anticipated. Flight Risk is being built on this foundation of truth, a story constructed not from speculation or rumor, but from real files, testimonies, and decades of ignored warnings. Every unsealed document strengthens the narrative, exposing the cracks in an industry that has long told the world how to think, feel, and vote, while quietly harboring its own skeletons. The curtain is falling, not gracefully, but violently, the way it always does when truth has been held back too long. The masks are coming off, and for once, the audience is watching the reveal unfold in real time. This isn't a story about politics, fame, or ideology. It's about children harmed, witnesses silenced, and the truth finally breaking through decades of deception. It's about the people who tried to warn us, finally being vindicated. And it's about the rest of us, watching, realizing that silence isn't an option anymore. Not for them, and not for us. Because the truth is no longer waiting. It's here, in 3 million files, in the eyes of survivors, and in the stories Gibson and Wahlberg are daring to tell. And the question remains, when the industry's greatest secrets are exposed, who will finally face the consequences? And who will slip away in the chaos? The story isn't ending, and it's just beginning. The files are open. The evidence is visible. The truth isn't hiding anymore, but the people behind it still walk free. What happens when the system built to protect the powerful finally meets the people who refuse to stay silent? Who will be held accountable? And who will slip through the cracks once again? The answers aren't clear. The stakes have never been higher. And one thing is certain: this story is far from over.